I'm Rebecca with 1C, and this is Silent Crash. You might have heard rumblings about a bill in the House that's being written to address some of the particular horrors enacted by PA 21 and 22. If you haven't, well, here's your newsflash. If you have, then stick around until the end of this episode for some thoughts regarding that bill. Before we go there, though, I wanted to share with you the rest of my conversation with Dr. Owen Perlman. He serves on the National Board of the Brain Injury Association of America and is a Michigan-based doctor caring for brain and spinal cord injury patients. In the latter part of our discussion, Dr. Perlman and I talked about the 56-hour limit in PA 21 and 22. See, before the reform, family and friends who took care of patients could bill for that time. This helped make it possible for wives or husbands, siblings, grown children, neighbors, and friends to quit their jobs and provide full-time care to a patient. I think it's important to pause and think about this because, to me, it shows the heart of Michigan. If someone needed long-term care, Michigan's Auto No-Fault program made it possible for someone that the patient knew, someone who loved the patient already, to provide that care. It didn't have to be automatically outsourced. A mom could quit her job and stay home to take care of her injured child. No, her 401k and benefits weren't reimbursed, but she could be reimbursed for the round-the-clock care that she provided. And this made it possible for her to keep a roof over her and her child's head and food on their table. From the child's perspective, it meant mom was there full-time to help, not a rotation of strangers. Think about how that impacts someone's care and rehabilitation. Think about how it impacts their mood and their outlook on life. It feels significant to me. And it clearly was significant for those who wrote the Auto No-Fault laws because they placed no limit on how many hours that friends and family could be reimbursed, other than, of course, how many hours there are in a week, which is 168. But the reform cut the amount of hours a person could be reimbursed all the way down to 56. That's 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Dr. Perlman explained how attendant care is not exactly an 8-hour-a-day experience.
The examples that I use are if somebody is a single parent and they've got 3 toddlers at home, kids are, say, 4, 2, and 1.
Mm-hmm.
They're with them awake all day, all the waking hours of those.
You have the baby monitor all night.
Well, yeah, and then the kids get up at night because they're scared or they're frightened or they peed or they this or they that. Mm-hmm. So at minimum, they're with them 112 hours a week because all those waking hours. And then if they get up during the night, they're with them more. So they could be awake all around the clock, for
As
for these
all
kids.
of us parents know, yes.
Right. Or if somebody's in their 50s and their father gets Alzheimer's and their mother has passed away and their father moves in, they're going to be with that person all their waking hours, 112 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And then the dad gets up and he's confused or he has a nightmare or he is incontinent, and you're going to spend more time. So you could be there well over 112 hours a week. So we seem to accept that in our society as acceptable. Mm-hmm. There's nothing magical about 56 hours a week. There's not a standard. There's nothing that says your performance is going to suffer. I'm kidding around for a second, but medical residents obviously work a lot longer than
right.
that, and they're dealing with life and death situations.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's nothing magical about that. So to impose 56 hours a week on people is just a restriction without merit.
Do you think that is just another example of how this was done so quickly and without a lot of thought of how this was going to practically play out in people's lives?
Of course. I mean, whenever you don't get stakeholders involved to understand what people do, the people that are providing attendant care at home have to take care of the environment of care. They have to be certain that everything is clean, that there's not in that way is that there's going to be infections. They've got to provide the supervision. They might have to do the wound care. They might have to do the bowel program. They might have to do the feeding tube. They've got to give the medications. They've got to get them to therapies. They got to do the therapy programs at home. They have to do all these things for these people, and help them calm down when they're acting inappropriately, when they're very aggressive, when they're doing property destruction, et cetera, et cetera.
Note what Dr. Perlman said here, that the stakeholders were not involved. That meant the people crafting the legislation did not consult the individuals who would be impacted by it. That's one of the details that sets off my storytelling instincts, and here's why. Legislators are elected to represent the people. Well, how can you legislate wisely? How can you craft a bill to represent the people without consulting the people? And as importantly, why would you even try? What would be the point of writing legislation that impacts a community and not include that community in its formation? It's such an odd scenario that I asked Dr. Perlman to clarify. Were those people not involved at all?
Not at all. Not at all. The irony is that the governor had made an attempt to appoint a select bipartisan committee to look at auto no-fault reform, but instead the Republican leaders in the House and Senate took that process over, and went ahead and created what became PA 21 and 22 that were passed in the middle of the night with this large bill that people hadn't even had a chance to read or review.
Why do you think they did that? Why do you think they passed this?
I think part of the reason they passed it was, I think there's two sides to this. One of it was because the insurance company had always wanted them to pass it, and then they finally had an opportunity to pass it because the last time it came to a vote in the House, from the House Insurance Committee that made it through the House, and I think that was Bill 5031. I could be wrong. That bill, even when there were fewer Democrats in the House, was defeated 63 to 45.
When was that?
That was right before the governor was elected.
Okay.
Okay. And so as a result of that, they kind of felt, we can't take the chance. We've got to push through something because essentially, for whatever reason, they're beholden to the insurance companies. I don't know what the reason is, but they appear to be beholden to the insurance companies.
And the benefit to the insurance companies here is profit? They save money. They're not spending as much money now that this reform is passed.
That's clear cut.
Okay.
Clear cut. And so the other part of it, why it was passed, and the reason that the governor, I think, was involved in passing it and signing it ultimately, was that there was a threat at that time that Dan Gilbert was going to fund a ballot initiative to essentially abolish auto no-fault. So they thought saving some of it was better than losing all of it.
Dr. Perlman has just mentioned what several people told me about Dan Gilbert. If you've been listening to Silent Crash all along, you might remember that we looked into Mr. Gilbert's business dealings and brought you what we found in episode 3. He not only was engaged in many real estate development projects in Detroit, but it appears he joined with Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan to threaten the governor. Either she could sign some form of auto no-fault reform, or billionaire Dan Gilbert would put his money behind a campaign to persuade Michiganders that auto no-fault was the worst thing on the planet, and that they all needed to vote it out of existence. I shared with you in episode 3 how something similar happened here in my state of Florida with the Koch brothers. I told that to Dr. Perlman as well. There were some very wealthy brothers who didn't like a particular tax incentive that was in place for the film industry, and they engaged in a very successful advertising program, completely turned the citizenry against tax incentives for filmmaking, and we have no tax incentives in the state now, and all of that entire industry moved up to Atlanta. So I do know that that works. Citizen initiatives of marketing and advertising, or wealthy individuals' initiatives to change the citizens' minds on a particular thing does work. I mean, framing works. Repeating a message works with citizens.
Or you could just say it the way it really is. Propaganda works.
It works. You have used the correct word, yes.
Yeah, propaganda works. You make people fearful, and you tell them, what's going to happen, even though that's not true, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. So that's
Why would Dan Gilbert want to get rid of auto no fault?
because Mayor Duggan in Detroit had wanted, with the census coming up, at that time, the Detroit census was in the range of 677,000 people,
Okay.
and he wanted to get over 700,000 people in the census to get more federal funds. And he felt, and I'm sure there was merit to this, that there were probably a large number of people who were living in Detroit and working in Detroit, but providing their insurance companies with suburban addresses of their friends or their family members, etc., to get more favorable rates.
Because their zip codes would net them higher premium rates
That is
from their
correct.
insurance. Okay.
Exactly right. And so, under those circumstances, um, rather than at any time in this whole debate looking at insurance company rate making and profit taking and the use of non-driving rating factors, they chose instead to, again, take it out on the patients, the families, and the providers. And so, interestingly enough, at that time that I told you about, the 63 to 45 defeat at that time, on that same day, Mayor Duggan came up to the Capitol building where the House was in session. And I don't know if you've ever been to a House that's in session, but
Yeah, I used to clerk for the House in Tennessee.
Okay, so then you know that anybody can come up there and they can put a little card in there and they can call out a representative and speak with them and share their thoughts. And so Mayor Duggan called out multiple Democratic representatives to speak with them, to try to explain to them, this is the way I've understood it.
Wow.
I was in the room, but to speak with them and to say, we'd love you to, I'm being facetious here, we'd love you to vote our way on this, meaning, to vote to cut auto no fault. And if you don't, with this election coming up, we will find candidates to run against you, even though I'm a Democrat, you're a Democrat, and you're an incumbent. And so,
Wow.
so when we had that 63 to 45 defeat, he followed through and he found candidates to run against the other Democrats, including incumbents, and some of his candidates got elected.
Wow.
Yeah. So then the irony, of course, of all of it was that then COVID came, and it changed everything. And we should probably talk about COVID as it relates to where we are with this process with auto no fault.
Yeah, how did that play into all of this?
Well, first of all, when COVID came, then people weren't working downtown, and they weren't moving in. Nobody was moving in. And then when they did the census, Detroit was in the low 600s.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they probably lost about another 40,000. So they didn't get that.
Oh, karma. Okay.
Yeah, all right. And then separately from that, because of what happened with COVID and because so many people stopped working because they had to be home with their families and homeschool their children, et cetera, then even as things opened up from COVID, many people did not come back into the workforce. Some because of the incentives to not work, but some because they still had to be at home because kids still hadn't gone back to school, all those kind of things. And so therefore, that was one of the reasons why there weren't people to come and work these jobs in the no-fault industry, we'll call it, in the post-acute industry. And when people started to come back to work because there was an acute shortage in all fields for these workers, then other companies could say, fine, we're gonna raise your rates to $14 to $16 an hour and give you a signing bonus.
Yeah, that's happening everywhere, all across the nation.
Except in Michigan's auto no-fault world, where they said, and while that's going on, we're going to cut your wages 45%.
Dr. Perlman is referencing here the part of PA 21 and 22 that cut post-acute care reimbursement rates to 55% of what they were in 2019. It sounds like a bunch of bureaucracy mumbo-jumbo, or it did to me, but here's an example that helped me understand. Let's say a home health nurse That's the kind that comes to your home and takes care of you. Let's say she was making $30 an hour in 2019. After the reform, she can only charge $16.50 an hour because that's 55% of what she charged in 2019. So now, for a 40-hour work week, that nurse's gross pay is no longer $1,200, it's $660. Meanwhile, a pandemic is raging, creating a significant demand for nurses. Hospitals all over the country are begging that nurse to come work for them. They're happy to pay her full rate, and she has to get her full rate or she can't pay her mortgage or rent and keep food on her table. See how a crisis of care was created? And when that single nurse then quits the company that she was with and heads to the hospital that can pay her actual rate, she isn't alone. Dr. Perlman reminded me the cut was across the board. It affected home health attendants, too. So why would any
Yeah.
medical professional work in
Well,
auto no fault?
I mean, let's talk about the people that are doing the attendant care first. So the key is we try to get these people to do attendant care. They were getting $12 an hour before. They're getting $6.25 now, and they have an opportunity. Can they go work some other place? Sure, I can go work for $14 at another place. When we're taking care of people at home, they need to be taken care of around the clock. When if I own a restaurant, it's not optimal, but I can close on Wednesdays and Thursdays because I don't have enough staff, or I can close at 11 o'clock instead of 2 o'clock because I don't have enough staff, but we can't do that in our field. People have to be there to work to take care of these people. So that becomes part of the problem.
I understood now why 41 companies so far have shut their doors, and why owners of others have told me in the past 3 weeks that they'll be out of business by December 31st. They can't keep taking care of their patient load if there aren't workers. And there aren't workers if they're not getting paid what they're worth, what tons of other places are willing to pay, because those places are not bound by the rate restrictions of PA 21 and 22. So I just have one final question for you, and thank you for all of your time explaining all of this to us. It's invaluable because, I say it on every episode. When I got that call and was told what was going on up here, it just felt so unbelievable. And the more that I sit and talk with people like you, it should be unbelievable. It's unbelievable that it happened. But it's unbelievable that it's being allowed to continue to happen. So my last question to you is why? Why do you think they're not fixing this? It's very apparent now that people are being hurt on many levels. The patients are being hurt. Their attendants are being hurt. People are losing their jobs. Businesses are closing. Nothing good is happening here. The insurance rates haven't even gone down from what I understand, and they've gone up for some other people.
Well, in many ways, they haven't gone down, but they've gone up in the sense that because now people have to buy liability insurance.
Yeah, I understand you have to buy an additional rider now to have the care you had before, so you're paying more for the same coverage you had.
There's a separate issue there, and the separate issue is that let's say I have full coverage, but I'm at fault in an accident with somebody who has $250,000 in coverage. That $250,000 in coverage is going to cover them while they're in the hospital. And now they go home and they're very impaired. They're going to have unreimbursed medical expenses for the rest of their life like they did before. And so now they can sue for those expenses. And who are they going to sue? They're going to sue the at-fault driver, which is me.
Yeah.
So you have to raise your liability. You have to have more uninsured and underinsured coverage in addition to the liability coverage. So yes, I'm paying a lot more now than I used to pay.
So it didn't fix the premiums. It didn't help the patients. It didn't help the patient caregiver network at all. It's damaged all of that. Why do you think they don't fix it?
I think that because there are some people in leadership. I think that the rank and file representative at this point has a pretty good understanding of it, but there's some people in leadership who still kind of buy the propaganda, and I'll be blunt about it, buy the propaganda of the insurance industry. If you read anything from the IAM, which is the Insurance Alliance of Michigan, and Aaron McDonough, who's their spokesperson, they're always talking about bad actors. You know,
Yeah, I've heard about
yeah,
this.
bad
There was
actors.
rampant fraud and
Right,
bad actors.
right.
Okay.
So let's clarify a couple things. First of all, there was never rampant fraud. If there was fraud, it was always not on the catastrophic side, because those are clear-cut, obvious injuries.
Mm-hmm.
If there was fraud, it was always on like the more minor accident with the neck pain, back pain, those types of situations. That's a separate issue. Fraud is illegal, has always been illegal, and they can go after people for fraud. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's always been illegal. I've always suggested that no fault split the catastrophic into one bundle, and the physical medicine part into a different bundle to take care of that. Where there may have been some fraud on the catastrophic side years ago now, the insurance company, I believe, was successful in putting those people out of business. Okay, and so those people are gone. Those companies are gone. And over the last 10 plus years, the people that are running the post-acute businesses, these are people of like the highest caliber, of the highest integrity, of the highest level of honesty, who are clearly committed to doing what they're doing.
Do I have a right understanding that even if there was a bad actor, let's say a new actor came into the mix and tried to charge $5,000 for something that should cost $3,000, there's already a mechanism in place on the insurance side, right?
Yeah, so let me tell you about that. That was the next thing I was
Mm.
gonna mention. You're correct, first of all. And so the issue there is that I can attest to the fact that insurance companies never pay more than they want to pay. And
Right.
so, and by that I mean, doesn't matter what the bill is, many insurance companies prior to the change in the law have used medical bill review companies. These are private proprietary companies, Mitchell Negotiation, Optum, Review Works, there's many others, where they actually send every bill to these companies, and the company then determines how much they're going to pay for it. And that's what they do. And then they send a letter to the provider, and they say they either send a check for that amount, or
Mm-hmm.
they send a letter saying, we'll offer you this amount. And some people will take it because they can't sue on every case, or others that have a bunch of cases, they'll take a bunch of these and they'll say, no, we're not going to accept that, and we're going to sue you, and they do. And so therefore, the only time insurance companies don't pay what they want to pay for is if they let things go to lawsuit and they lose the lawsuit. Then the judge and the jury make the determination of what they're going to pay.
And a judge and jury aren't going to allow fraud, so they're not going to allow a $5,000 charge for something that there's clear precedent that it's $3,000. So
Yeah, and that's rarely the case.
this information is so important to my quest to find the story beneath the story here. The Insurance Alliance of Michigan has, for years, claimed that there is rampant fraud in the system, and therefore reform was needed. But Dr. Perlman, who has been providing for patients in Michigan for decades, is telling me that claim is false. He is not the only one to set me straight on this either. And his reasoning rings true. Insurance companies did not pay fraudulent rates. If they believed a rate was fraudulent, there was a mechanism in place to address it, as Dr. Perlman just explained. The system did not need to be overhauled because of fraud. That claim is, well, it's a fraud. And apparently, the legislators who passed the reform in May 2019 knew that there was no fraud months before. They knew it because Dr. Perlman told them.
I sent stuff to the governor and to state representatives. In fact, I wrote in February 2019. I wrote to the Senate Insurance and Banking Committee, showing this information and showing specific examples of this, of the bills that came through, and then what came back from those agencies. So we notified them about this officially, I'll call it, in February of 2019. That bill, again, was from May of 2019.
So this claim that, well, we just didn't know. I mean, maybe you didn't know, but it's not because you weren't given the
Now,
information.
I mean, insurance companies always know, but yes, maybe the legislature didn't know, but I did let the Senate Insurance and Banking Committee know at that time
Hmm.
that they were always paying what they wanted to pay. And so the irony of all of this is that probably auto insurance companies are like the least industry that requires any legislative relief.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
yeah,
Very
but
true.
they're the ones that get the most legislative relief. And we know why they get the most legislative relief because they fund the campaigns of these representatives.
So going back to the question, maybe that's why. Why do you think they don't fix it?
I don't know why they don't fix it at this point because it's so obvious now.
It does seem obvious, which tells my storytelling instinct that another tale is happening beneath the obvious. When we come back, I'll tell you about a bill being written in the House right now that, while it could provide relief, might also be just another chapter in a story whose first word should never have been written. You're listening to Silent Crash. Welcome back to Silent Crash. You've been listening to my conversation with Dr. Owen Perlman, who has provided care to the catastrophic car accident community's brain and spinal cord injured patients for decades. Our conversation happened a few weeks ago on a crisp, cold day in Michigan. As we wrapped up our time together, Dr. Perlman circled back to a point that's made all the more relevant today. First, let's listen to what Dr. Perlman had to say.
The other point that I wanted to make, separate topic, but just going back, that the families that are doing the family provided attendant care, in addition to essentially their agreement to work for low wages before we had this change, and now it's ridiculously low wages because it's well below, minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing it, not being paid at all for overtime. They had no paid holidays. They had no paid time off. They got no short-term disability. They got no long-term disability. They didn't get workers' compensation. They weren't being, nobody was paying into a retirement fund for them, et cetera, et cetera. And now to say we're going to limit, now that they're talking about, well, maybe we'll go from 56 hours per person, per family to per person. So maybe we'll allow another family member to work 56 hours as well.
The point Dr. Perlman makes here is particularly prescient because as I bring this to you weeks later, there is a bill being written in the House. At first, I'm given to understand that the bill did not address the 56-hour restriction on family provider pay at all. But this week, I received a new version of the bill to review. And in it, there is a change from 56 hours of family and friend attendant care pay to 112 hours per week. I sat with that for a little while. I tried to put myself in the position of someone who is impacted by it. I listened to a few people who called to tell me their feelings about it and about other parts of this bill that don't fully fix what PA 21 and 22 broke, but might allow people to keep their heads above water for a while longer while more reform is worked on. And as I thought, my story instinct started pinging again. This whole situation started to feel like a camel's nose under the tent. Here's what I mean. What if you wanted to get rid of a program that was well-funded, well-functioning, beloved by the public, and serving wounded, and therefore sympathetic, people well? What if you wanted to get rid of the whole tent and everybody in it? What could you do? Well, you'd first have to realize that you can't do such a thing in one fell swoop without a giant public backlash. You start killing people off, there's going to be an outcry. Public groups will form. Protests will happen. Media will report. Heck, a podcast show detailing the impact might even get started and be in the top 10% of listened to shows in the whole nation. People will rally to get that tent back up and strong. Clearly, you are not, with your giant camel self, going to be able to just tear it apart and be done. But you want to tear this tent down for good. So you do the worst thing you can, knowing they're going to put the tent back up. But while they're busy doing it, you'll have gotten your nose under the tent. You're patient. You can deal the death blow via 1,000 cuts from that point. You can reform it a little here, a little there, nudging more of your head under the tent, then your neck, a bit of your body. The others in the tent grow accustomed to having you there. See, you're not a threat. You're not here to tear the tent down again, they think. They don't notice you inching further and further in with this quiet bill and that quiet bill. A little reform here, a little reform there, until one day you're finally fully in. And with your giant, lumbering body, you fully stand. The tent cannot contain you. It collapses. Your mission is done. As I watched the camel stand in my mind's eye, the white canvas of the tent flapping and billowing to the ground amidst a cloud of dust, I wondered, were PA 21 and 22 just the first steps in a long-range campaign to end no fault altogether? And then I remembered the end of my conversation with Dr. Perlman.
And then the people that are coming from residential programs and have to move home, they may not even have families.
They can't afford attendant care.
Yeah,
there aren't enough attendants now because they're going out of business.
They can't afford attendant care. Their families may have passed away, because that's why we have guardians on some of these people. They don't have families anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what are they supposed to do?
Every time I think about that particular aspect of it, I just keep going back to why. The money was there. You have $23 billion. It's not like there was we're running out of money, so we have to shut the system down. The system has the funding, and it's not even tax dollars. It's funding. These people paid for it.
Right, essentially.
I just don't understand the why behind this.
And we all agree with you.
Wow.
Because this is not what rational people do. This is not what people do that have any type of a heart.
No.
It's evil.
It is. That's not the first time I've heard that word.
Yeah, it's evil.
Is it wise to negotiate with evil? I'm not saying the people doing so are evil themselves. I can't possibly know such a thing. Yes, the representative that is spearheading the House bill's effort voted for the bills that became PA 21 and 22, but he might be incredibly well-intentioned and right-hearted in his considerable efforts to right the wrongs he helped create. But can something so wrong, so, as Dr. Perlman says, evil, be made right? Or is the only true and good solution a pure rejection of it? Is the wise option to slam your foot down on the camel's nose so that he completely retreats from the tent? Or, as we call that in government, a repeal? Michigan's heart for families and victims was apparent in the no-fault system. Does that heart still beat across the land? 41 companies out of business so far, 5 people dead. Countless pushed out of their homes and into nursing homes, thousands of lost jobs, all happening on purpose, unnecessarily, and during a pandemic. Is the pure heart of Michigan beating within the people who are trying to fix this fix? They are questions that can unfurl an entire story. Whether this one has a happy ending or devolves into lasting tragedy remains to be seen. If you have been impacted by PA 21 and 22 and you want to share your story, please get in touch with us at silentcrash.net. This show is made possible solely by the generosity of people who care. If that's you, please check out the Silent Crash campaign on GoFundMe. There's a link to it on our site at silentcrash.net. Thank you for listening.
Follow and subscribe to Silent Crash, the quiet unraveling of Michigan's auto no-fault and the destruction of lives, wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on what you've heard here and how you can help, visit silentcrash.net. Silent Crash is a production of the 1C Story Network. The show is written by Rebeca Seitz and produced by her and Rebecca Bond Tucker. Post-production services by Zischer LLC. This show is supported by the generous donations of concerned individuals via the Silent Crash GoFundMe effort. Learn more about the 1C Story Network at just1c.com. That's JUSTONEC.com.
The 1C Story Network, for the love of stories.